try to navigate what comes next for our country. That's what I think is one of the greatest traditions of American democracy, is the town hall. And I think that that's something I really wanted to lift up here today. Why I called this together in just a few days, and again, the fact that you all showed up so quickly, and it shows you the energy and the anxiety, and I feel it too. You know, I've done 2 other town halls in just the last 2 days. You know, someone was telling me that they just have so much anxiety, sometimes it's hard for them to breathe. That's what they were saying, you know? I've had a lot of sleepless nights. I'm sure you have as well. And I think that that's something that is so critical for us to be able to engage together in and try to understand what is happening and where we go from here. So I wanted to just, again, be able to talk this through with you. I've done my best to try to think through how to talk about how I see this moment. So if you don't mind, what I want to spend some of my remarks engaged in is what do I see unfolding from the vantage point that I've had at the Capitol through this work. Lay out for you 5 things that I see right now that I think are really worrisome about this country. And I want to share with you just what I think comes next after that. Now, the reason why I call this together is because I think it's incredibly important to situate this and really be able to hit home that these are not normal times, right? These are not a situation of business as usual. You know, when we see what's happening, and again, I say this with all due respect to people who could very well have voted, you know, for this president or across different parties, people that don't see themselves in an ideological spectrum. But I say, from what I've seen, I really do believe that this president is abusing his power in this office. We're seeing a situation right now where we are not just on the cusp of a constitutional crisis, but we are in a constitutional crisis right now. And I say that not just as your United States Senator, but many of you, you've seen me bring my kids around over the years. I got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I see what's happening. Like, this is not the America I want my kids to grow up in. This is not the kind of America you want your kids and your grandkids to grow up. I just hope anyone across the political spectrum can recognize that we cannot stand to have this kind of chaos in the greatest, richest, most powerful country in the world. We should not have this kind of chaos constantly. But what you see is this chaos that is there, that is out there, that is their plan. That is President Trump's plan, is to have the chaos. It's not out of just incompetence. Some of it's out of incompetence, but a lot of this is designed to be in that way. So I want to just kind of run you through this. So, you know, a couple of things that I wanted to go through here in terms of where I think things are at. So as I said, I'm going to give you 5 points kind of run down to think through to try to help organize our thoughts on what we're faced with right now. Number 1, we're seeing this administration take efforts to be able to consolidate and seize power within the executive branch, sidelining the other 2 branches of government, which is something that is unconstitutional and has been engaged in lawless actions that is so devastating and could be something that will be damaging to our country for quite some time to come. I think first and foremost, one of the most visible aspects of this is Elon Musk. We cannot have a situation in this country, and again, I hope this is something that we can agree across the board, where we have somebody who is simultaneously trying to dismantle our government while also running businesses that are got billions of dollars in contracts for this government, while running the largest super PAC in this country right now and threatening elected officials to be able to do, you know, saying that you have to vote this way or that way, otherwise I'll fund a primary against you. That is something, again, I hope all of us across the political spectrum can recognize is wrong. And in terms of how this is unfolding, what we see is this devastation towards our government. And I say this as someone who worked worked in 4 different departments and agencies in the federal government, the executive branch before. I understand there are things we can do to try to make things more effective, more efficient, try to address waste. I think all of us can agree with that. And if you go to your average American, you can say, oh, do you think we can, maybe we should trim some money out of the government or make it a little smaller? A lot of Americans say, okay, that sounds good. But what I want to express is what is being talked about in terms of the guise of efficiency is not about that at all. It's not about efficiency. This is about trying to push a very radical and extreme agenda that is really trying to reshape the ability for the government to be able to provide for the people. And I'll say this in a place that hopefully we can very much understand. But for instance, I worked very hard alongside many in this county to be able to bring a brand new VA health clinic here into Ocean County. To provide for our veterans. Now we're seeing efforts that try to cut tens of thousands of staff from the VA, and not to mention all these government officials, all these government public servants that are being fired. 1 out of every 3 government employee is a veteran. This president right now is engaged in an effort to be the president that has fired the most number of veterans in American history. That is not the kind of distinction that I think that Ocean County would want to stand for, given how large of a veteran community we have here. So this is an effort that's very much abusing that power in terms of that dismantling. What we see is an effort that is also trying to do something to be able to consolidate more power, which is to be able to call for emergency powers. This presidency has, for instance, called for a national emergency on energy at a time when our nation is producing more energy than we ever have in our nation's history, including on fossil fuels, and not something that they can complain about. We're seeing this president evoke the Alien Enemies Act to be able to take an action. So again, for people to just situate us, Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 times in our nation's history. For the 1812 War, World War I, World War II. Each of those had Congress do its constitutional duty to declare that we are in a war. Now, I'm in Congress right now. We have not declared that we are in a war. We have no right to be able to engage in that type of activity, and let alone the fact that the last time we invoked the Alien Enemies Act in World War II, our nation used it to round up thousands, tens of thousands of Japanese Americans and intern them in the middle of nowhere. We don't have a good track record when it comes to this type of action. On top of this, what we see is an effort that is about right now, and this is something that you're really seeing peaking at this moment, but an effort right now to discredit and demonize the judiciary branch right now. And that is incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous on so many levels. I've been engaged and working with a judge here in New Jersey. You might know her name, Esther Salas. Does that name ring a bell? Esther Salas is a judge doing her work in the courts. Obviously, some of the people that come before her courts aren't going to like the kind of rulings that she made. One of those showed up at her house, shot her husband, shot her kid died. And when we see what's happening right now, when we see the richest person in the world calling out judges by name, when we see the President of the United States calling out them by name, we see how dangerous of a moment this is for the judges, but also for our country. This is a dangerous moment in that way when we see this effort to try to impeach judges, to try to say if anyone rules against this president, that this is something where they're now seen as the enemy. They're now seen as someone who's going against our nation. Well, if you look at the judges who are ruling against Trump right now, if you look at it, and the study's been done in terms of categorizing, they seem, more on the liberal side, the centrist side, the conservative side. What you see right now is you see of the judges, liberal judges have ruled against Trump 84% of the time, centrist judges 86% of the time, and conservative judges 82% of the time. So you see that across the board. So you're not seeing a situation where you're seeing this being that he's being ruled against at such a high level when things are taken to courts, the very simple answer is he needs to stop breaking the law. Judge Boasberg, who's been coming under a lot of attack by the president. President calling him, like a liberal, radical, activist judge, saying he was appointed by Barack Hussein Obama. No, he was appointed by George W. Bush. Somebody that, yes, was elevated by Barack Obama, was also elevated by Chief Justice Roberts in different roles. If you looked at some of his ruling records, he took action that allowed for conservative, he ruled in favor of conservative organization to get access to 14,000 emails of Hillary Clinton. He ruled in favor of Donald Trump to prevent his tax records from going out there. It doesn't sound like a liberal, radical activist judge to me. These are the types of things that are undermining our judiciary, and we are at such a fragile time because we live in the time of the greatest amount of distrust in government in modern American history. And when you see what happens when you try to discredit the legislature, that's what led to January 6th, right? And you see that kind of effort to discredit that and discredit our ability to be able to follow through in the Electoral College, and you see that same kind of effort now strategically and purposefully trying to discredit another branch of government that is about trying to consolidate power into the executive. A second thing, number two, is that this president is using his power of the executive that is causing direct harm on the American people as well as retribution against those that have different opinions than those who stand up to him. And that, again, as someone who worked in diplomacy, traveled the world, I worked in authoritarian nations before, that's what you see there. You don't see it, you shouldn't see it here. And that is something, again, I hope people across the political spectrum can understand that they would not want, a Democratic president to be taking these same types of actions against. And I think that's something I hope we can recognize is going way too far here in that way. When we're talking about the retribution, we're seeing, firings from the Department of Justice, from other types of agencies and departments, based off of whether or not they've taken actions that the president disagrees with. We've seen business community. I've talked to a lot of business leaders that are terrified right now because they see how this president is calling out and targeting individual companies, law firms, and other organizations by name, trying to destroy their businesses, trying to do that and trying to then, just cut some deal where then he can extract something from them in a tit for tat. And that's the kind of thing that's just creating a chilling effect across the business community now. Making sure, and that's why you have, so many billionaires, coming before him, surrounding him in that type of way, pledging fealty to him. That is not a democracy. When you see efforts that are trying to squash dissent, even if it's ideas that you don't agree with, you shouldn't have this situation where you see that kind of attacks, whether it's against students like Khalid, whether it's organizations like Habitat for Humanity that are coming under attack for work that they've done by EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, who doesn't believe in climate change. I mean, these are huge problems that we're seeing right now in terms of that sense of retribution out there. And that's something that, again, I hope we're able to understand is a huge problem. And as we see when it comes to the direct harm, as I told you about the VA, when I told you about, so many of the other, challenges that we face in our government to be able to provide services to that, this is something that is visible right before us. We can see the harm that is being done to people across this country. And that's why, I'll be honest with you, that's why I could not support the continuing resolution that Speaker Johnson put forward. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that what Speaker Johnson did, what President Trump did in pushing that forward, in trying to ram something through unilaterally, that this was something that caused a real no-win situation for this country. And it was an absolute horrible choice, not just for Democrats in the Senate, but for America. That we're in a situation that, yes, if there is a shutdown, we would see, I was telling you how important the courts are to so much of the work that's happening right now. Yes, after 2 to 4 weeks in a shutdown, we could very well see the judiciary running low on money and having to lay off staff, not being able to move forward with some of the cases that they're engaged in that are trying to hold, potentially hold this administration accountable for its actions. Now, we have a lot of government workers right now. In fact, there's one, Ed Hart, she told me that she disagreed with my vote when it came to the CR, what my position when it came to the CR, because she was worried about losing her job, and she was, rightfully reminded that yes, after 30 days, the administration does, if a shutdown continues past 30 days, that the administration does get greater powers to be able to determine who to fire and who not to. So again, we constantly remember that it is Speaker Johnson and President Trump that put our country in this horrible situation. But the reason why I couldn't support it is because right now we're starting up another appropriations process, gearing up for September with the end of the fiscal year. What's going to stop them now from saying, oh, we can just run over them again? And I think that's why it's important. And I'll be honest, I disagreed with Senator Schumer in terms of his decision in terms of allowing that to go forward. We're going to have some very serious conversations in the Senate this coming week, and I wanted to touch base with all of you, give you my thoughts, hear from you about where we go. But what I think we should have done is I think we need to not only push back, but we got to show what it is that we're trying to fight for. When we're going up for this September with the budget, we got to hold up our budget against this. We got to show, hey, this is a budget that is about protecting health care, about protecting Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. This is a budget that's about protecting people in this nation, making sure that they can be able to provide all people, everybody. Not just the billionaires, not just trying to push things and trying to gut things so that they can get the biggest tax cut that they've ever had. And I think that's what we need to be doing. Is pushing for, not just be reacting to the Republicans and waiting for them to set the table. Mm-hmm. We need to go on the offense. We need to show. We need to be out there every single day doing events like this, in communities like this, to be able to show what it means for us to be able to push that message and be on the offense. A third thing here that I'm very concerned about, and many of you know I worked in national security and foreign policy before. And I did that working under both the Bush administration, the Obama administration. People in national security, whether in uniform or not, they serve the country, they serve the Constitution. Their job is not to, again, pledge fealty to an individual president, to serve our nation, serve our Constitution. A couple weeks ago, last month, I was in Munich when Vice President Vance went up and delivered what I thought was one of the most shameful speeches of foreign policy that I've heard an American leader give. Standing in Europe in front of our allies and our partners who have fought alongside us in so many different wars, and shaming them, calling them out, disrespecting them, and then, we see this president disrespecting NATO, criticizing it, wondering, threatening to pull us out of NATO, when the only time that NATO ever evoked collective defense, Article 5, was in the defense of the United States after September 11th. And again, across the political spectrum, and I appeal to Republicans, in Ocean County, across the way, is we have always, as a nation, stood up united against our adversaries, especially against Russia. We should not be capitulating to Putin, because again, that's just going to make Putin stronger. That's just going to make him think he can get away with more and more. What we're seeing right now, whether it's that disrespect in the Oval Office when when Trump was meeting President Zelensky. I just met with President Zelensky a couple weeks ago. We should be honoring their commitment to stand up against. We should be understanding the importance of standing with nations that are trying to protect themselves from invasion, trying to protect themselves from authoritarianism and dictatorship. That is something that is very fundamental, and it's not just for them, it's for us. It's about the fact that it makes us more secure. We live in a very tumultuous global moment. And what happens when it comes to Ukraine is going to shape how Russia acts, how China acts, how Iran acts, how North Korea acts. North Korea literally has troops in Ukraine right now fighting alongside the Russians. Instead, we have a president saying that we should own Gaza, thinking that that's a good idea. And we see that continued violence there that I know nobody wants to continue to see going on. We want to make sure that we get Edon Alexander, the hostage, back home to New Jersey for his family. We want to see a situation where we see the end of this violence that has taken the lives of so many Palestinians. I know families here in New Jersey who've lost loved ones. We want to see that, but we have a president that clearly is uninterested in that as he's posting AI videos of him, lounging on the beaches of Gaza. They take it over and try to turn it into that type of Mar-a-Lago in the Middle East. That is not somebody right now that, again, I hope people across the political spectrum understand is acting like a commander-in-chief. And this is something that is very dangerous because it's not just about his ideas on different policy issues. I hope you can see it is a coherent belief, but it's a belief that I think is going to make us weaker. What he is trying to push is a neo-isolationism that is trying to withdraw America from the global stage. And if we withdraw from the global stage, it's going to create much greater security problems abroad, but it's also going to hurt our economy. It's going to make us weaker, and I'll tell you, when I talk to leaders and officials in other countries right now, they tell me, they're like, hey, look, we're just moving on. You let us know when you get your act together, and you catch up. But we cannot wait for America anymore. How sad is that? How sad is squandering a century's worth of investment where so many people fought and died to be able to get our country to this place where our abilities to have these freedoms, now we're having those freedoms taken away, and so we're squandering all of that leadership and that leverage around the world. That is something that's going to make us weaker. The fourth point is, why is all this happening? How do we see it? Well, look, when I went around Ocean County and when I went around New Jersey this past year, top thing that I heard about high cost of living. We've got to get affordability under control. Things are too crazy right now. Do we see the president taking strong actions on that? No. Over 60% of Americans right now, across the political spectrum, don't think this president is doing enough to lower costs. And in fact, he's making it worse. These tariffs that he's been trying to put on are going to be devastating to our country. It's going to hurt. It's going to, who it's going to hurt the most? Those who need help the most. It's not going to hurt billionaires who have so much money that they have their own personal space program to build rocket ships out of space. It's going to hurt average people, the types of people that we know are right here in Ocean County. Seniors on a fixed income. People working 2 to 3 jobs just to get by. People who are struggling right now with food insecurity. I've delivered Meals on Wheels here in Ocean County and other things that we've seen the true level of hunger here in Ocean County. That's what's going to be hurting. And people need to see that. And that leads to the fifth point is, what is this all leading towards? Why is all this happening? Whether it's the cuts to the government and the firing of employees, or this effort to be able to get rid of the Department of Education and try to cut this funding that is so critical for our public schools, and creating these lies and making it seem like it's the federal government that's controlling the curriculum across the country. No, we have local control. We have that ability. It's just what we've seen over the years is that we do need, if everything goes back to the state level when it comes to education in terms of the standards across this nation, what we've seen is what we saw before, which is we're going to see abuses when it comes to discrimination. We're going to see abuses where places are not going to invest the level. And in particular, we're going to see real harm befall the disability community. In terms of kids with disabilities now left out on the side and completely deprioritized. And that's something where, it's so important as we see the strides that we try to make to help support students and young people with autism or Down syndrome or any number of other issues. They deserve to be able to live a good and decent life and be able to have that. We wouldn't have to come up with IDEA funding and programs if every state and every community was doing it on their own, but clearly we need to make sure that they are protected. So why is all this happening? It's not because they're just trying to reduce the deficit and be fiscally responsible. All that money that they're saving is going towards the trillions of dollars of tax cuts that they're trying to give to the richest people in this country. That is where it's going. So I just really want us to just constantly understand it's important to follow that money and be able to see what is actually happening. And I know it's not easy to look at, and it's tough to see and see it right in front of us. So therein lies this question. And therein lies a very important question, which is this question of what comes next. Where do we go from here? Now, what I think is I've been going around and I've been seeing, just how the country is responding, going through the research, trying to understand, especially for, voters that have voted for Trump before, or movable voters, swing voters, and other Americans that are maybe not paying as much attention in this moment. What I see as incredibly powerful, a couple things that I think we can really need to push forward in a concerted way to build a national movement around. One is, I really do think we need to push forward very clearly and aggressively on stopping these tariffs. This is something that's resonating. This is something where, we already seen Trump, kick the can down the road on some of these, because I think he understands that there's real pressure here. He understands that it's a vulnerability. And I think that that's true. I think this is something that can galvanize a wide coalition across the American people, especially the business community. I'm going around, and I ask you to help me. Go around Ocean County, talk to business owners, talk to the business community. Hear how they're feeling. Try to get them to speak up. Let's lift up these voices. I'm trying to build a network across this entire state, trying to mobilize my colleagues to do so around the country and really try to hit home just how devastating the tariffs will be, because we call them what they are. They are a tax on the American people. It's going to be a big lie from the Trump administration when he tries to say, the American people are not going to have to pay for this. That's a lie. In the same way he said that Mexico would pay for the wall. It's a lie. And that's what the people need to see and understand, that we're the ones that are being punished for this. In fact, the estimates are that every American could very well face $2,000 increase in their costs per year, based off of these tariffs. That's a lot at a time when people are really struggling. So that's something that I think we need to engage in. Another thing that I think is incredibly potent and something that can very much mobilize a wide coalition across this country is, I believe that we need to mobilize a national movement to save Medicaid. This is unbelievable. I say that as someone who honestly, in 2017, didn't consider myself to be political. I hadn't come to town halls or got involved in campaigns. I know a lot of people here probably feel the same. But when we saw a Republican-led Congress and a Trump-led White House push to try to gut the Affordable Care Act, we saw a mobilization. We saw people stand up and say, no, you are not going to take away my health care. We saw a congressman in New Jersey that used to represent this town take action to lead the charge on gutting pre-existing condition protections, and look what happened there. And I think that we are in a similar moment. And why I say this, and I know it feels like it's challenging. We say, okay, well, what are the chances we can do? What are the chances that we can succeed in saving Medicaid? Well, I can assure you, if we don't try, it's never going to work. And in 2017, we saw how mobilization at town halls, Republicans getting yelled at, and we see this grassroots movement mobilizing, creating that energy around the country. I do personally believe it created space for people like John McCain and others to be able to oppose their own party, to be able to stop it. And look what happened. We did stop that effort to be able to gut the Affordable Care Act. Now, what the Republicans are trying to bank on here, the Republican leadership, Speaker Johnson and others, is they're hoping that, they're thinking through Medicaid, they're like, okay, Medicaid doesn't have sort of the natural constituency behind it of high-frequency voters that you see with Medicare and Social Security and other issues. They're hoping that there's not going to be this type of national mobilization because the people that often are in need are people that are low income, struggling, vulnerable people, people with disabilities, seniors that have significant health issues that are at nursing home and long-term care facilities. They're hoping that there's not going to be the kind of noise. But what we see here is we have 2 million out of 9 million people in New Jersey getting their health care through Medicaid. 1 out of every 3 kids in our state, Medicaid. People with disabilities, Medicaid. Seniors with nursing homes, long-term care, those that need it the most, Medicaid. And it's not just that, it's about their families too. I will share this with you. This is something very personal. I'm going to get through this town hall, but I'm going to have to immediately go and be able to go to my father because my father just took a bad fall overnight. He's at the hospital right now. He's being cared for now, but these are the types of challenges that people are facing. And it doesn't just affect him. It affects me, it affects my family, it affects so many others. At a time when I'm dealing, by the way, today is his birthday. Not only is he struggling, but in the hospital by himself right now, but it is his birthday. And we need to make sure that we are there for them. But as I've gone through and we've been having to struggle with my father for a while now, not only the physical issues, but we're seeing a level of cognitive decline now that is getting very challenging for us to be able to manage. And what we've seen right now, and I see it personally, but I've heard it from so many others, we are in a situation right now as a country where either we're paying out of our pockets, $10,000 plus a month, or we basically have to put my father on a path toward bankruptcy to make him eligible for Medicaid. How is that the choices of people in the richest, most powerful country in the world? I bear that out to you, saying, yes, we should save Medicaid. We need to make that mobilization, but we also have to show what it is that we're fighting for and showing that we deserve better in this country. We need to be moving in that direction, not backwards. Another thing that I'm trying to mobilize on, a lot of you know, you've seen the work that I've tried to do in trying to stand up against corruption, whether down in D.C. or whether here in New Jersey. I think that this is something that can be very potent. When you see this situation like the conflicts of interest with Elon Musk, when you see a Secretary of Commerce, plugging and shilling for Tesla and other challenges, that we're seeing throughout this administration, we know that there are real problems that are happening. That there are people that are trying to use our government as a piggy bank for themselves, enrich themselves, push forward on the things that will benefit their donors, benefit their friends and their families. That's the kind of thing that I think can, again, appeal widely across a lot. So I'm dedicating a lot of my efforts in Congress, down at the Senate, trying to do these investigations. As you know, again, I said I worked in the executive branch. I got a lot of people I know across the executive branch that are able to feed me information about what's actually happening. And then try to do our best to be able to expose that. So I wanted to share that with you so you have a sense of some of the things I'm individually working on. And I hope that you support that idea of making sure we go after the corruption. I do think that's the kind of stuff that can penetrate through. That's the kind of stuff that can really get through and engage and show that this president is not a disruptor, he is a hoarder, He's trying to hoard the power to himself, hoard that power, hoard the wealth for him and the people that are loyal to him. And that is the breeding ground for corruption. Another thing that we need to make sure that we're doing is that we are building a wide coalition. This challenge before us, again, cannot be thought about in terms of just partisanship. In fact, I think that will hurt our ability to be able to mobilize the kind of force that we need to. This is, as I said, something about those who believe in the Constitution and want to protect it, and those who believe that they are above the Constitution and want it for themselves. And that is the kind of effort that I know all of us need to be engaged in as we're going through it. I'm sure some of you know people, myself, I know people, friends of mine, people in my network, that still give in to some of this disinformation that's out there. I'm sure you know it too, right? Let's make a concerted effort to go out there and try to engage, try to do our best. And I hope that the framework in which I've tried to talk through today can help you think through how you might be able to get it through to some of the people that you know. But if that is what we are up against, when we see that level of disinformation and brainwashing so often happening on social media, we need to make sure we are taking the efforts. And I'm pushing my colleagues to do a lot more of these. I was told by people in politics at the Capitol, maybe you shouldn't do town halls. But I think this is actually a moment to lean in and to be able to do this type of I know I went on for a while. This is a lot longer than I usually start, but I felt like I wanted to really explain to you how I'm seeing this one. I hope it was helpful for all of you. But it's so important now more than ever to stay engaged. So I have to tell you, as I was walking through, greeting some of you coming in, you were talking about how grateful you were I showed up. I'm grateful you showed up. And this is something that's so important. I hope that you continue to do so every single day. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for your patience here. Why don't we just start to get back into it? We'll do questions two at a time. So we try to, and I'll stick around a little longer. We'll try to get through as many things as we can. So my team will be coming around. Keep your hands up.
So Andy, I just wanted to ask you, how is like a Democratic club we can help in certain situations that are coming up? Like I teach second grade, and you were saying you had a 7-year-old. I had a 7-year-old boy come into my classroom the day after Trump got elected, and he said his mom and dad sat him down and said that they don't know when it's going to happen, but they have to go back to Mexico, but they're not sure when it's going to happen. He came in and he said to me, he was crying, and he said, "Can I hug you? Because I don't know what day I'm never going to see you again."
Thank you for that question. Can we do one more?
Yes. I'm a former school teacher who's disabled, and it's very difficult for me to stand here because I'm weak, but I knew I had to come out. I just could not come out. When I heard the Speaker of the House say he wants to do away with separation of church and state, and his reason for it was, you don't understand what the Founding Fathers really meant by it. And I thought, oh no, he does? So we've been doing this wrong for 249 years? We've been doing this wrong? I do not know where my country is going, and I am scared to death. And then the thought of the way the Republicans are just, hopefully not all of them, just smirking and making this like it's some kind of a joke, when it's not. I'm disabled, and I'm concerned for my life. And I'm used to be a teacher, and I'm concerned for the lives of teachers and children in this country. But I am beside myself when I hear people like Mel Gibson and Tucker Carlson say, "Daddy's home. Daddy's home, and now he's in power, and he's going to spank you." This is not a game. This is our country. And he is not my daddy who's in the White House. He is not. He is not my daddy. And if this is your daddy is drunk with power, full of rage, and has a godlike complex. And my daddy, comes from heaven. Not from here, not from the White House. And what's most disturbing about all of this, is the distortion of Christianity. This is not what Christianity is. Donald Trump does not represent Christianity. In fact, he's the opposite of it. The scripture's very clear. The words that come out of a man's mouth say what's in his heart. And you will know my people by their fruits. And these fruits do not match Christianity. And I'm most scared for that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And thank you for, first of all, thank you for coming, even though it's difficult to do so. And you speak with just such raw honesty. And I think it's something that I think a lot of us feel, right? You know, this sense of just how unmoored our country has become. Not just in terms of the policies, but just in terms of how we're treating one another. Like, how have we become this nation just filled with anger and rage? You know, a nation where we lose sight of the fact that we're part of something bigger than all of us. And instead, it just has gotten ramped down to just this tribalism, this narcissism, this self-interest, and selfishness. And again, like, that's not the America I want to raise my kids in. You know, and it's a tough thing for me to, you know, I grew up revering the office of the presidency and revering this. I remember the first time ever getting to walk into the Oval Office, being just in awe of it, and now having to explain to my kids, do not mimic, do not emulate, do not look up to this man in terms of his character, that we have gotten to this place. So yes, look, again, like, we can have differences in policies, but that's not what's happening right now in our country. You know, we are seeing a corrosion, and I think that that's something. I grew up. My family, you know, very religious family, and you know, when I don't bring it into my work much, but when you think about what's happening in terms of, you know, Medicaid, when you think about what's happening in terms of looking out for those who need support the most right now. You know, the efforts that are going to try to, while they're trying to gut Medicaid, also cut SNAP benefits. And, you know, just where is that sense of charity for all? Where is that sense of looking out for each other in that type of way? And instead, we've got to this point where we're scapegoating people and saying they're the reason why we're suffering and dividing us in that type of way. When we are a nation where there's enough to go around, and the billionaires would share it with the rest of us. Instead, we just see that hoarding and that corruption of the American dream that used to be about what my parents said, which is about trying to just make sure that the next generation, your kids, could have a better life and more opportunities, that sense of progress. Instead, it has been about, you know, how many yachts can you buy and how much greed can we consume and hold on to. You know, and I think that that's something that is deeply sad about our society. So thank you for raising that. I think a big part of that is we see, for instance, with the immigrant community. You know, my parents immigrated here 50 years ago. You know, grew up in a war zone out in Korea during the Korean War, sought refuge here to be able to build a family. And that's what our country has been about. It's about giving that sense of haven, giving that sense of support. And now we, in our society, in the year 2025, we have families here in New Jersey, around the country, that are in hiding right now. You know, not going to get their health checkups. You know, the FQHCs, the Federally Qualified Health Centers, are telling me, you know, how quiet things are. You know, people not going to get health checkups, not going to schools, not getting an education for fear of being separated, for fear of being deported. And these are not the criminals. I think we can agree that, you know, we have people who are violent criminals and others, you know, but we're talking about just people who are just trying to seek a better life, and we should have the types of support in that. And if there are challenges, if there are questions, then we give them due process, go through the means with which our Constitution allows, not just citizens, but everybody, Amen, to be able to benefit from. So thank you for raising those important issues. Why don't we do another round?
Can you assure me that my body, my choice won't change New Jersey? Can you assure me that my body, my choice won't change in New Jersey?
Yeah, look, I'm going to be honest with you. you, and I'll do only do two, but you asked such an important question right now. We are at a point right now where we have such a level of anxiety and unpredictability as a country that it's hard for me to be able to look you in the eye and say nothing is possible. And that's why I think we're here, right? You know, because we understand that just because we're in a state that has voted against Donald Trump and has a Democratic Party in control on the state level, we don't know what could happen next. And that's something that a couple fronts, what we see is, look, if there is a push at the federal level that could supersede what happened, and also, look what just happened with the Supreme Court. And so, we're not at a place where we can feel those assurances. And again, I think that's why we know that these are unprecedented times, that we're in uncharted territories. But the other thing I'll just say is, look, what we need to focus on isn't just at the federal level. We here in New Jersey have an opportunity, unlike something that people have across this country. We are one of only 2 states that has a governor's race this year. A lot of my colleagues in the Senate, they come to me, they're like, what's happening in New Jersey? What's it feel like on the ground? They know that we have an opportunity to do something that people in 48 other states don't have, which is try to shape what this national mood and this national movement and momentum is. I can't go into the politics direct here in this setting, but I'll just tell you is that I hope you understand that is something tangible that each and every one of us can do, and that the next governor of New Jersey will have a very big role in terms of understanding whether or not we are a state that fights for the people or a state that fights to be alongside and bend the knee to Donald Trump. So I'm going to take 2 questions.
Lisa Arena, good morning and thanks for taking my question. Senator Kim, you voted against the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Acts. In communities like Brick Township, where high school sports are vital for young women's development and scholarship opportunities, your vote raises concerns. How do you justify the decision to parents and female athletes who feel it compromises fairness in competition?
Thanks for the question. I want to take one more, or we'll do 2 together.
Andrew Siegel here. I just want to bring up, I'm a service tech, travel across the whole entire state, and as probably a lot of you probably know, in this state, it's become a very, very MAGA. Like, from 2016 to worse now than it is. And I believe it's in messaging, and everybody, I've seen a lot of people saying Chris Smith isn't here, Cory Booker isn't here either. And at least Andy Kim, he's in Senate for 6 years. Cory Booker is up for re-election in 2 years, and he's not coming out and talking with us. And my main question is, what's going on with Democratic leadership, and what are we doing? What are we doing to actually change the leadership that have a better message? Because I'm tired of hearing from Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, and literally, the hair that I have, pulling it out, and then hearing AOC and Bernie Sanders and cheering for them. And I don't hear any leadership talking about that. We're talking about good leadership.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll take them in order. So, yes, there was legislation that was put before the Congress, legislation that was pushed by Speaker Johnson that I felt was not in good faith. It was not legislation I was trying to address what it was actually about. What we have understood in terms of the rhetoric we hear out of Speaker Johnson, out of Nancy Mace, out of others, is that they're using this legislation to try to push forward on their one fundamental belief, which is that they think that people in the trans community have mental health issues, and that they don't believe that is something that actually exists. And I cannot support that type of approach. Both in my own personal friendships, but also the people that I've met and the sheer fear that so many of the LGBTQ community feel right now, that is something I felt needed to be stood up against. And that is not the way in which we engage, and we are instead should be pushing forward on the Equality Act and making sure that there are civil rights be afforded to people when it comes to gender and sexuality. And I think that that is hopefully something that we can recognize. So yes, I understand this question when they give me a piece of legislation saying it's about one thing when I know it's about something fundamentally different. That is not something I can support. When it comes to the Democratic Party, when it comes to, look, what I'll say is I am proud to have as my partner, Cory Booker. He is somebody that is fighting for New Jersey.
Where is he? Where is he? I'm serious.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I get it.
Here.
No, let me speak if you don't mind. Let me speak. No, I talk to him on a daily basis. We're planning things that we can do both together and across the state of New Jersey. He is somebody that has a big microphone, a big effort, and you were talking about how you applaud Bernie Sanders and AOC for going around the country right now and mobilizing outside of their state. Cory Booker is somebody that can lead in that way too when you're looking for Democratic leadership and you're seeing that. But it gets to the point I just want to say, look, my job here, I'm not here as somebody who is trying to speak on behalf of the entirety of the party. In fact, many of you see me stand up to the Democratic Party here in New Jersey. So call out Congress as I see that. And we recognize that, look, this is not some static organization. This is something that's very much up for grabs to be able to shape. And I think that's why it is that I stepped up to run for Senate. I do think we need to make sure that we have new voices in the mix, that we can try to have that sense of energy where it goes. I'm glad that I was able to double the number of millennials in the U.S. Senate on the Democrat side and try to push forward what I believe is there. We're going to have some very tough conversations back at the Capitol in the coming week. And that's why I wanted to talk to all of you first, hear from you, but also share with you some of the things that I want to see us do, like that national movement to be able to save Medicaid, to fight back against the tariffs, to root out the corruption that we're seeing right now, and the other things on that level. So I'm not going to sit back and wait for somebody who is in leadership to say this is what we're going to do. I'm going to just do my thing here and show proof of concept that we can do this. I'm here to show, not just to you, and not just to people in New Jersey, but people around the country, that we should be going out to the community, going out to the people, having these town halls. My ability to do this, I had a lot of colleagues of mine say, well, tell us how it goes. And I'm going to tell them it went great, because that's our job, and we got to get out there. One thing I learned about politics over the years is that you cannot just assume that someone else is going to fight your fights for you, right? And we got to make sure we're pushing in our reins. And if you have good ideas for me to consider that you want me to engage, this is our chance. And I'll try to get through as many questions as we can. At some point, I want to let people go, but I'll stick around and try to stick around and be able to talk to folks more and more as we go. But let's do a couple more rounds of things.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Hi, my name is Jamie Franceschini. So I'm glad to hear your comments today on the constitutional crisis and the actions that you're taking to reclaim Congress's power and their co-equal roles in our government. Like this gentleman up front, I also wanted to voice my concerns about the leadership in the Democratic Party and echo those sentiments. I never really called myself a Democrat. I consider myself an independent and really a Democrat by default, because the GOP has demonstrated that they are just willing to trample all over our Constitution and the values of this country. Donald Trump is an elitist billionaire, a rapist, a criminal, a con man, and an insurrectionist, and the Democrats have not been able to beat him. What world are we living in here? The corporate Democrats care too much about pleasing their donors and billionaire friends and are not aligned with progressives, which have been fighting for change most Americans want, regardless of political affiliation. The return of free and fair market by busting large corporations' monopolies, holding governments accountable to the people, getting rid of government corruption, aka Citizens United, living wages so people can afford just to get by. The Democrats need a united and laser-focused message on affordability and the billionaire takeover of our government. Democrats need to become the party of the working class. Otherwise, what are we doing here?
I'd like to ask something I don't hear much about these days. I'd like to know what's being done to protect the election process and to ensure that we will continue to have free and fair elections.
Thank you for these two questions. To the first question, I think that actually connects very well with the previous question there, just about, about that sense, of showing, what I was saying earlier, like showing what we're for, showing that vision, and right now, we cannot just say, oh, we're against this CR, this bill, but, about pushing forward in terms of that vision. I think, that's what's going to be able to counteract this weaponization of fear that we see with Trump and with Musk and others, pushing forward in that way that's very much trying to divide us and trying to unify and give a sense of how lives will be improved. We have taken actions, in terms of our efforts to be able to fight climate change, lower healthcare, but we haven't done enough. But the things that we didn't message good enough. We didn't go out there and actually be able to connect the dots for people in terms of what was actually improved and how we can do better by that. And I think that that's something very clearly needs to be understood, needs to be internalized, and needs to be pushed forward. This is not by accident that this has happened. We've seen the far right for years and decades be planning out what it is that they're trying to achieve. Whether that's on the Supreme Court and the plan to be able to overturn Roe v. Wade, or what we've seen in terms of just the, weaponization of what we see so much about social media, and why it is that we see that become such a cesspool for disinformation out there, and sowing that sense of hate and anger that makes me terrified about my kids' generation as they start to get into, technologies and other things like that in terms of what's going to happen. So, I hear you on that front. Now the question is, what are we going to do? What is our actual approach on that front? So yes, I agree that absolutely needs to be where the focus is. And I hope you've seen in me as somebody who's been really trying to think through this here in New Jersey, trying to think through what it takes to be able to stand up to that, but to look at our work, not just as legislators, not just as people in politics, but people that need to help galvanize a movement here in the United States that is going to have a wide coalition that's going to break down not just in the tribalism, but be able to have that accomplishment going forward. And a big part of that, is about trying to mobilize. And one of the biggest things that you can mobilize on is about free and fair elections and trying to make sure we're protecting that. That should be something essential. Again, I worked and lived in countries that don't have democracy or have failing democracies where, people risk their lives to be able to have free and fair elections. We take it for granted. And we see the problems that are there. And I know, someone was asking me, how do we make sure Elon Musk doesn't get into the voter data? How do we make sure that we don't see this kind of erosion across the board? We need to make sure we understand those vulnerabilities and be able to protect it. And I've tried to push forward legislation that would make sure we can have more secure machines, that we can have the kind of process here in New Jersey, and we need to do better here. But we need to, again, understand, there, it's about 50 different states. It's about every part of our country that's running things independently. That leaves a lot of rooms for vulnerabilities. So that is something that we need to make sure that we're prioritizing. But the other thing I'll just say about free and fair elections, free and fair elections isn't just about the machines and in the ballot box. It's the woman here hit a nail on the head. It's about how Citizens United has corrupted our democracy. How do you have that sense of fairness when you got billionaires that can create these super PACs that are able to blanket the airways, spread their disinformation? It gives them such an advantage. I often say it's like playing chess against someone with all queens. It doesn't give the fairness that are out there. We need to have the ability to have campaign finance reform, to be able to fight back against Citizens United, to be able to engage in many different ways, push back on the special interest. Probably the most popular piece of legislation I ever introduced was legislation that would ban members of Congress and senior government officials from owning and trading individual stocks, for instance. you deserve, so that people know, that the American people know that their elected officials are working for them, not just trying to pad their own bank account or be able to increase their stock portfolio. So another round.
Senator, as you know, we have about 200 people that could not make it inside, so we actually have some questions from outside, and then we'll do another round of two inside.
Yeah. Okay, the first question, and I'll do these three, and then we can do some more. And thank you to the people who are outside. Again, there are hundreds of people outside that weren't able to. You ever think you'd see that in Ocean County? 10 o'clock in the morning on whatever day of the week this is, I don't even know. And so thank you everyone outside who's been listening, huddled around the speaker out there. It says, as a nurse taking care of patients with Medicaid as their insurance, what will the government do with these patients once we stop funding Medicaid, once we stop funding Medicaid? Another question, many in nonprofit, education, and public service are losing their funding and jobs. How will you and the Democratic Party fight for them? How can you take steps to protect the progress against the progress that's been eroding our work on HIV/AIDS through PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, the Department of State, Global Health, and USAID? Something that I think is very critical. Maybe I'll take it in reverse order just real quick. So I don't know how many of you know this, but 21 years ago, my very first job in the federal government was at USAID. And I was proud to work there. I was proud to be a part of an organization that is part of our fundamental foreign policy of this country. And I always try to express to people, it's not charity. This is about our global leadership. This is about how we try to mobilize and be able to build forward. I don't think anyone can say that the Marshall Plan was just a throwaway that we shouldn't have done. It helps our strategic interests. And when we're talking about, for instance, PEPFAR, this is in the continent of Africa. Right now, the continent of Africa is having the highest level of growth in the entire world right now. In the year 2050, they're going to see, I think, about like another billion people. We're seeing an unbelievable level of growth. That's where the workforce of the future is going to be globally, and a lot of issues. It's good for us to be able to engage, to be able to build that. And PEPFAR has been one of the most successful programs, actually started by George W. Bush, a Republican, and somebody that has really, we've seen this engage under both Democrats and Republicans. I actually had written down a quote. Let's see if I can find it here. Because I thought this was a really important thing to just kind of remember. Because when I worked at USAID, it's in the Reagan building. It's in the Reagan building for a reason, because Reagan, when he was president, he said the ultimate importance to the United States of our security and development assistance programs cannot be exaggerated. He said, the excuses. We can't afford foreign aid anymore, or we're wasting money pouring into these poor countries. Or we can't buy friends. Other countries just take the money and dislike us for giving it. Well, all these excuses are just that, excuses, and they're dead wrong. And that was Ronald Reagan that said it. And I think it's important for us to recognize this. And right now, we're seeing China actually now taking up some of these programs that we're now cutting up and going to the rest of the world and say, oh, if America's not going to be with you, they're going to toss you aside, we'll stand with you. Just handing it over. We're literally doing President Xi and Putin's jobs for them in terms of being able to spread their influence. So yes, I hope we can continue to push on with PEPFAR, try to address it. This is the litigation, other steps that we're trying to take, and I still am hopeful that we can reinstate, USAID as soon as possible, be able to get this forward and stop the shameful action that has was clearly illegal action going through. In terms of this effort of the nonprofits and education, public service losing their funding, we saw that with the funding freeze effort that came underway. And what we saw was one of the most visceral. When I look back on the last couple of months here, when the funding freeze happened, we got 700 calls to our office just in a matter of a few hours, just immediately people coming out there and understanding. Again, that's what we need to hear. We need to hear those stories. When we're hearing about how programs for Head Start are going to get cut off, when we're hearing about programs that are for people in the disability community to be able to live independently, are being cut off, that's the kind of story that's going to be able to help us make real what this is. Because as I said, the average American, they're like, oh yeah, let's trim some money. Like they only hearing that from Elon Musk. Like they're going to think, oh, that sounds reasonable. But we have to be able to make sure that we're breaking through in that type of way and standing up. And when it comes to what comes next, the next big fight in Congress is going to be about this budget reconciliation process the Republicans are going to be putting forward. And when we see what cuts they have, that's something that we absolutely need to stand against. This nurse, I think it kind of gets into this. I won't linger long here, but just when it comes to Medicaid, what will the government do to these patients once Medicaid funding is cut off by the Republicans? There is no plan B here, and I think that's what's important to know. It's not like just the state of New Jersey can take up the entirety of that funding, when we're already struggling when it comes to our own budget and other issues. No state can be able to take that on. So unfortunately, people need to hear the consequences. And if Medicaid is cut, especially to the extent of the $880 billion that Speaker Johnson is pushing for, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk are pushing for, people will die. And that's why I think that there can be a national movement to really push on this. I brought to the joint address as my guest a man who suffers from cerebral palsy. His name's Kevin. And he was there at the Capitol with me, and he said he needs Medicaid to be alive for his health care, for a caregiver, for modifications to his home so he can be able to live the life that he deserves. And he said, very much for him, it's like, give me liberty or give me death. He's like, if they go through with these Medicaid cuts, people like him will die. And I think that that's why it's so important to be able to lift up these stories, to be able to create that national movement, to be able to push that, to be able to have that effort. We run national TV ads and other things and really informing the people in America what is at stake and be able to hit home just how damaging this would be. So thank you for those outside with those questions. Why don't we take a couple more here inside?
First of all, I just want to say thank you very much for continuing to do the town halls. They are very necessary, and so thank you for that. One of the things that you were saying is, I do believe the messaging that you're talking about. When you're talking about the cuts, I don't think the average person understands that the states get a lot of their funding from the federal government. So for instance, all of these services that people expect to continue to happen, but they are proponents of the cuts in federal funding, they don't understand that the federal government is feeding those programs. So I think that's the messaging that really has to be louder that's coming from the Democrats. And I happen to be a federal employee. So one of the things that I am also is a union official. So we are fighting what's happening across the board, because a lot of these firings that we've seen, obviously the judges have said that they were illegal, but yet the current administration is still fighting the rulings. So one of the things that I do want to say is we have to understand that federal employees are taxpayers too. So we are not just these little pawns on the chessboard. People who have lost their job, some people are in the midst of medical procedures, some people are in the midst of mental health issues. So these are real people, real lives that are being affected. And when we talk about, and my agency is talking about a 65% cut in spending, that means that a lot of the support that we get is just not going to happen. So my question, here's the question. So what is Congress doing about intended as it was intended to do. So how is that going to be dealt with?
Senator.
Hi, Senator Kim, thank you for being here. My name is David. I just arrived here in a time machine from the year 1939. I've been taking a look around and I'm curious as to apparently why a lot of things have not appeared to have changed. Kidding aside, a couple of nights ago, last week, Doge invaded the U.S. Institute of Peace. Barely reported in the press here. The U.S. Institute of Peace, with the aid of D.C. police, they ransacked the offices, replaced the president of the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is not even a federal institution. My question is, who is Doge? Who? And what can you do, if anything, what can you do on our behalf to find out where is the transparency?
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, and you know, as I said, I used to work at the State Department directly across the street from USIP, and you know, I have a number of people who work there who've been texting me, telling me about this. We're now pushing forward on litigation efforts to be able to stop this, but absolutely illegal actions that we're taking. The same way that I was there on the day that they shut down the Ronald Reagan building and prevented USAID workers from going in there. Again, those are the doors I walked through 21 years ago, and then now I was stopped by a guard who said that he was instructed to not allow any workers to be able to get to their desk. And I asked, instructed by who? Who is giving these orders? Who is it that's engaged in this? And we're tracking down, we see that, DOGE is part of the executive office of the president. They are under the White House jurisdiction. And that, that is something that, again, Congress did not give powers to the White House to be able to take those actions over entities, departments, agencies, and institutes that Congress set up by law and federal statute. So that's exactly the lawlessness that is out there. And then what do? They fire the inspector generals right out of the gate, right? Why do you do that? Because you don't want to have that transparency. You don't want to have that accountability. So what we're pulling on is we're trying to interview all these people at these different agencies and departments, including institutes like USIP, be able to document that it's going through the litigation side, but also trying to see what investigations we have to be able to engage. For instance, I'm on a committee that has oversight over DC. And so if DC police are engaged in that type of activity, those are things where we need to have that sense of understanding and transparency in terms of what's happening. But you deserve to know, who is actually doing this work, on a day-to-day level, beyond Elon Musk. The fact that we don't know, while they're trying to claim that this is at the end about, against fraud and waste and abuse, while they are simultaneously hiding themselves from the American people, they do that because they know what they're doing is wrong. And I think that, exactly, on a day-to-day level. And I think that that's something that, again, needs to be exposed. And I was telling you, that's one of those efforts that I'm putting my effort into in terms of exposing that corruption. Because I think that these are one of the things that, again, people across the political spectrum understand is wrong. And that is something that can really lead to exposures of some of those corruptions are key. And it gets to, when you contrast that to federal workers, right? When you contrast that to those that are serving our nation, serving other both Republicans and Democrats, I call them the steady hand at the wheel. I for one, when I see this divisiveness in the country, I for one believe that what our country needs as we approach our 250th anniversary is we need a new era of public service in this country. We should be looking towards our public servants as exemplars of those that are trying to do this right, which is not trying to tribalize our politics in our country and just lead to a system. We had a period of time in our nation where public servants were pushed aside and loyalists were put in. That was under Andrew Jackson, and it was called the spoils system. And it was called that because for decades we saw corruption run rampant. And the answer to this, that tried to push back on this and solve this, was the creation of the professional civil service. And saying that, it's not a good idea to just have a president come in and appoint everybody and have the loyalists and to be able to have that type of approach, because it just led to so many problems in our society. But you see somebody, I don't know if this name means anything to you, Russell Vogt, you know who this guy is? If you don't know him, you should understand who this person is. He's in charge of an organization, Office of Management and Budget. Normally very low-key, no one knows what's happening, but he is somebody that is really running a lot of the plays here. He was one of the lead authors of Project 2025. And what he said, even before he came into office, to work, is he said that he wanted to traumatize public servants. That's literally the word he said, traumatize. He wants to make them wake up in the morning and feel like they're the enemy. And that's exactly what he's doing. That's exactly the playbook that they're running. And so, yes, when we see that, when we see, him, directing the misuse of appropriated funds, we need to have that transparency. Need to be able to document, understand where that's going. But what we see right now is, Speaker Johnson, Leader Thune, unwilling, we should, from the Congress side, be able to take our own direct litigation to be able to defend our branch of government. And unfortunately, right now, the people that can bring that direct lawsuit against the executive branch from the legislature is the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. Which is why it's so critically important that people know that, they understand, how it is that we can try to push in that direction, put the pressure on them, but ultimately be able to change and take the gavels away from them.
Yes, Senator, we're going to do the last two.
And I'll stick around and I'll answer other people's questions afterwards.
Thank you, Senator Kim. My name's Carl. I'm from Westville, New Jersey. I get very nervous speaking publicly, but I'm much more nervous about what's happening in this country, and that's why I'm here. And I would like to know, what can I actively do other than vote and march in protest to work against Trump and his un-American agenda? And what can Congress do to make sure abuses of power like those Trump is committing cannot be committed by future presidents?
Today from East Windsor in Mercer County. Thank you, as the other woman said, thank you for coming out and hearing us today and speaking to us. I have two questions. My first one is, you spoke about Democrats having to be on the offensive, and my question is, how many times is Trump going to do one of his illegal executive orders, things that we know have to be done through Congress, but how many times are you going to let him get away with it before you actually really says, you can't sign this order, you can't do this, or find a legal way to arrest him or impeach him, something. And my second question is directed towards our grassroots movements in New Jersey. So, have you heard of 5051? And will you support us at our protest? We need our elected officials to come out to these events, to help us draw crowds, speak to us and motivate us. And if anyone here hasn't heard of it, NJ 5051, and you can go to Linktree. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions, somewhat similar there, and I thought the gentleman over here did a great job of public speaking, so thank you for that. And that sense of what can you do, and certainly I think it kind of meshes with that sense. There are protest efforts, there are community groups. I am speaking at a number of these. I can't go into it again in this setting right here, but finding those groups. People ask me, how do you try to engage? How do you try to draw attention to it? Yes, it's important to draw attention, but what's also important is about sustaining that attention. How many times have we seen a mass shooting in this country and we see sky-high couple weeks. And then in the gun lobby, what they're just saying to themselves, they're saying, just wait. Just wait, it's gonna die down. Like, that's the problem that is befalling us. And the best things that I've seen when you see organizations like Moms Demand Action, they're organizing together to stand together and sustain that attention. That has been one of the most remarkable grassroots organizations that I've seen, and we see that on a number of different fronts. We need that kind of action. And when I was talking about this effort to be able to save Medicaid, I pointed out, part of what the Republicans are counting on is that there is not sort of a natural constituency there that is organized in the same way that there is for Medicare, or there is for some other issues that are out there, and that's what they're counting on. So that is what I'm trying to help build. And I'm going out there and I'm trying to engage with the disability community across Ocean County, across this state. You can help me. Let's try to engage with my team. Help us understand, how do we try to reach out to those families? Making sure that they understand what's at stake. Making sure that they can then engage the community to be more broad about that effort. When it comes to long-term care nursing homes, when it comes to people who are struggling and working 2 to 3 jobs, and Elon Musk and others are telling the American people that these are lazy people that don't want to work, that's wrong. And so that's what we're trying to coalesce around. So think through your own lives. What communities are you connected in? This is one of the communities with the strongest veteran community in not only the state but in the country. That is a powerful constituency. And I've heard from so many veterans that are so upset right now about the cutting of funding that's supporting veterans to prevent suicide and to have health care, that people being laid off that are caring for our veterans, laying off veterans who work in the federal government, on a lot of different fronts. Like, that is something, if you are connected, if you are able to, let's mobilize that community. There's a community with a tremendous amount of credibility. And connecting them to some of these protests or other movements, I'm happy to try to engage as much as I can. This is my first week back since the start. They've been locking us down there with so much of what's going on, but at every chance that I have, I try to do this. Is my 3rd town hall in less than 72 hours. We've been able to do these town halls, be able to talk directly just in the room, close to 1,500 to 2,000 people just in a matter of a couple of days. We're going to continue, and I'm going to continue this across the state and bring in some of my colleagues to be able to do that at the Senate and House level and others. And please, let's support that and continue to grow. The other thing I'll just say, in terms of the Congress side, yes, you have every bit as much right to feel frustrated right now. You do. And I know that is there. And again, I'm not here to defend that. I'm here to listen to my bosses and try to make sure that I understand your level of concern, the anxiety that's out there, show you I am very worried as well, which is why we need to make sure that we are pushing on with every tool that we have. I wish we had many more tools than we have, and that's something that we're going to try to build towards as well as we go through the elections that are coming up. But again, like I said, I'm trying to make sure that people are paying attention to what's happening here in New Jersey this coming November. It's going to be critical. That has national implications. Building towards 2026, but we also know we can't wait to 2026. There are damages being done right now, and I'm going to do everything I can to be able to build up my microphone, to be able to engage, make sure people in the community, if they go tell them about this town hall. If they didn't know about it, ask that they follow me on social media, go to kim.senate.gov, follow what we're doing. I need your help to be able to build up that kind of platform here in the state. I'm also trying to mobilize nationally as well, especially when it comes to young people. So look out for some of the things that I'm trying to do on that front. Again, I can't talk about it in this setting, but there's a lot there that we need to be thinking through and thinking outside the box, and not just thinking about this in terms of our normal efforts. So look, again, I promise I get people out, so and I do need to try to go see my dad at some point if you don't mind. But I'm willing to stand here and take some more questions from folks that want to come on up here. But thank you so much for coming on out here today. I really appreciate